I just bought a $120 Alienware laptop from Facebook Marketplace. That's about $80 US. And while it is cheap, there are definitely some hurdles to overcome. It only came with a 90-watt power supply. These are supposed to have at least 150 watts, so we're going to have to see what we can do about that. Maybe I've got a spare lying around. Anyway, let's take a look and see exactly what we can do with such an old Alienware laptop. This is the M14X released back in 2011. It definitely sports the old school aggressive Alienware design, nor do they any longer include a screen resolution as low as 1600 by 900 in any of their laptops. And that resolution was in fact an optional upgrade even back in 2011. Looking at Dell's website from the time really takes you back. Second generation Intel Core i series processors and a recommendation to use Internet Explorer 9. Yikes. This particular brick of a laptop was pretty expensive, this configuration costing 2,300 Australian dollars. It is now a little worse for wear though. The seller says the hinge is kind of broken, but it could just be this little cover coming off hopefully. And the rest of the laptop isn't all that dirty, but some of the rubber is starting to become sticky. And I doubt the single fan has ever been dusted out. And we'll see just how bad it is later in the video. Next step was turning it on. I used my bigger Dell power adapter to supply the correct wattage. It then boot into Windows 7, not activated of course. The seller said that the battery in this didn't work at all, but when I plugged in the correct charging adapter, the battery did begin to charge. Although the health is only 56%, so the battery won't last long, but at least it's got something, which is better than nothing. The system seems to be working fine, and here we can see it has 8GB of RAM, which was an upgrade available back in 2011. The mechanical hard drive in this computer is pretty slow, and to speed things up, I'm going to put in this inexpensive SSD that I recently purchased. Not only that, we're going to install Windows 10, and hopefully we can use the Windows 7 license key that's on the base of the Alienware, and with any luck, we'll be able to activate Windows 10 with it. While this drive isn't a very big capacity, I can run games from an external SSD and take advantage of the speed from the USB 3.0 ports. Most laptops only had USB 2.0 ports at the time, but this chunky unit had both. But what can this well-aged, high-spec gaming laptop do in 2022? Let's find out. With Windows 10 successfully activated using the product key on the base, I tried out one of my favorite games, BeamNG Drive. At the lowest graphical settings with a resolution of 720p, it averaged 31 frames per second, definitely playable but not ideal. It was also getting hot, with the CPU reaching 98 degrees Celsius. Having a go at a competitive shooter, Counter-Strike Go fared a little better. Running on medium settings at the native resolution of 1600 by 900, it averaged 50 frames per second, which is totally playable. A game that's rather taxing on older laptops is Playerunknown's Battlegrounds. This battle royale shooter averages 17 frames per second at the lowest graphical settings. And to be fair, I couldn't seem to change the resolution no matter what, so it may even run better at lower resolutions. So modern games definitely struggle, if they run at all. At the native resolution of 1600 by 900, Halo Combat Evolved in the Master Chief Collection was only just playable, averaging just 22 frames per second. But how about much older games? The 2005 release of Star Wars Battlefront 2 ran very well at the highest graphical settings, averaging 79.8 frames per second. This kind of laptop is great for games over 10 years old. After running a few games and benchmarks on here, I've come to the realization that it's probably thermal throttling because it gets incredibly hot. Both the CPU and the NVIDIA 555M graphics chip use the single fan. Yes, one fan for both the graphics chip and the CPU. And to get to it, it actually requires a complete disassembly, so I doubt anyone's ever redone the thermal paste, or maybe even cleaned out the dust from the fan. So let's open it up and see what we can do. Accessing the RAM, battery, hard disk, and optical drive is easy. All it takes is removing the two screws on the base. This battery's health is below 60%, however you really can't run old gaming laptops off of the battery anyway. This laptop must have been taken apart with some force as the clips holding the optical drive cable in place had come off. Not a big deal, it can still be carefully pushed back into the connector. Another easy to access part is the RAM. You've got two slots that are populated by 4GB sticks. This is still an adequate amount even 11 years later for basic tasks and light gaming. And next to the Wi-Fi module, it looks as if there is room for a cellular modem perhaps. Every other Alienware device I've worked on has given me access to the processor and graphics chip without the need to dig further. This this model really requires you to take out many screws, and also the top casing. This is necessary to get to the fan, which we can assume has accumulated a lot of dust in the last 11 years. There aren't many resources online when it comes to disassembling this model. Just remember that I'm likely glossing over certain steps for the sake of pacing in this video, and I'll leave a link to the video I followed in the description, but definitely take it with a grain of salt. Now the very tactile feeling keyboard can come out. Even 11 years ago, Alienware keyboards came with RGB lighting. While they seemed pretty fancy, you could definitely get similar performance for less money from other brands. Were they better built? In some ways, yes. This particular machine is sturdy, but suffers from devulcanizing rubber. In other words, some of the soft plastic coating is starting to melt. Driver support, overheating, and design flaws are also sadly common with many old Alienware laptops. Oh, and I found a few random screws floating inside the casing. It appears as if they originally held the hard disk in place, and details like that, broken clips and strip screws, are telltale signs that someone wasn't very careful working on this laptop previously. It also seems as if no one has ever taken it apart this far, and I can see why, as it's quite a lot of work to do. And here we get our first look at the sizable cooling pipes that lead to a single fan. I feel as if this would have worked a lot better at dissipating heat with a separate fan for each processor. And oh boy, we've really got enough dust to insulate an entire house. No wonder it was running hot. And if you've got an old laptop like this, consider cleaning out the fan. Your processor will thank you. Another piece of the overheating pie may also be the potentially dried out thermal compound. And dried out it is. This stuff can't have been very effective at transferring heat away from the dies. I'll wipe the surfaces down with isopropyl alcohol and be sure to remove thermal paste from the heatsink as well. Using an old toothbrush, I scrubbed inside the vent to release any debris in the way. It's always worth looking inside the fan itself as dirt can build up near the edges. Definitely much cleaner now. And while I had the unit apart, I also vacuumed out any hair and dust I could find. You can tell this is where the fan sat right underneath the keyboard, and overall it's not visibly gunked up with food or that dirty. However, I'll go over it with some eucalyptus oil. One slight issue I did notice was that the hinge had a bit of play. In other words, it was slightly loose. An easy fix with a small dab of Loctite to the ends of the mounting screws, followed by an application of new thermal compound. It's important to apply enough as these processors don't have an integrated heat spreader, meaning complete coverage of the die is crucial. Now the reassembly can begin. I feel a lot more confident piecing it back together as I took note of the steps it took me to take it apart. At least accessing the processors in newer and or bigger Alienware laptops isn't this time consuming. A full disassembly is not what the average consumer ever wants to do. But something I like doing is cleaning things, and with the help of some eucalyptus oil, the top casing is now looking a lot less grubby. Some areas weren't as easy to clean since the rubber has started to melt, so they are a little bit sticky sadly. Being a matte black surface, it'll probably look dirty again within a few minutes of touching it, still a lot cleaner for the time being. The screen is mostly undamaged, aside from some scrapes where it has made repeated contact with the edge of the keyboard. And on the screen hinge, I was able to clip the loose cover back on, and I held it in place with a dab of glue. So let's see if there are any improvements to the gaming experience with the freshly cleaned out cooling system. And recently I've been using Edify's Neo Buds Pro wireless Bluetooth earbuds. The sound clarity is awesome and I found them very comfortable to wear. There's active noise cancellation and really long battery life. And if you want to pick one of these up, there's a link in the description. Edify haven't paid me for this, but they did send them over, and honestly, there's some pretty good earbuds and I'll never be using my AirPods Pro again. Honestly, they're that good. Anyway, back to the video. The first game we're dropping into is Playerunknown's Battlegrounds. The Alienware runs so much cooler during gameplay with both the CPU and GPU down at least 20 degrees Celsius, a pretty good improvement. BeamNG Drive is pretty taxing on the CPU, which after the repaste ran nearly 30 degrees cooler, before it was almost hitting 100 degrees, the boiling point of water. And for games like Minecraft, it's a totally fine experience on the Alienware, frequently reaching over 100 frames per second when used alongside the performance enhancing mod Optifine. Feel free to join my server if you'd like to as well. It's crazy to think that this laptop is nearly 12 years old, but its age really shows when it comes to graphical performance. I'd personally go for something a little bit newer if you plan on using it for gaming. So there we have it, an 11-year-old Alienware laptop cleaned up and working pretty well once again. The inclusion of an SSD definitely made a big difference, but the 555M graphics chip is just nowhere near good enough to run modern games, which is a real shame because it's in a really nice chassis with a pretty capable quad-core i7 CPU. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. For $120, I think it's an absolute bargain. Would have been better if it came with the correct charger. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.